being the rocker that I was, I want to do something for the teens and the young adults. And there was a really good alternative Christian movement of the time in the late 90s, some really good bands, including DC Talk, Switchfoot, and some other terrific bands out at the time. I'd like to do something with that.
And that is the voice of longtime Southern California radio personality and voiceover talent Bill Wright. And last time we were discussing Power 106 when it first started in the mid-'80s as a female-oriented dance format with artists such as Janet Jackson, Stacey Q, Debbie Gibson, Tiffany, New Kids on the Block, Information Society, kind of mixed together, and then eventually moving to the hip-hop direction with Big Boy and the Baker Boys. But now Power is just, the ratings are really, really sad. I've been looking at the book after book the last couple of years. I'm honestly surprised they've not changed format.
Yeah, well, L.A. changes, and it was really when you think about, for example, K-Big and Coast, earlier on in the 70s, early 80s, it was beautiful music, which you'd think of probably as an older demographic, probably mostly white, and then ultimately, you were catering to a much more diverse audience, which L.A. became, and I guess it maybe is evolving a little more even today. Yeah.
Well, in fact, 95.9 The Fish, the plurality of their listeners are Latino. And this is a Christian soft rock adult contemporary station.
Well, that's interesting because we were, back in the KYMS days, we were told that, imagine a gal named Becky. She's a soccer mom driving a minivan, and she's driving her kids to school or back from school, and 25 to 44 for sure, and so that's interesting. I hadn't known that yet.
Yeah, just because I think the demographic of California now, I think it's 34% European descent, 40% Hispanic, Latino, and then everything else is kind of like less as far as the percentage is concerned. So that's really interesting. Now, after K-Big, you moved over to production at Ambassador Advertising. And actually, I know a couple of people there.
With a stop at K-Wave in San Clemente, which is Calvary Chapel's radio station. That's an interesting story. K-Wave was up on top of a hotel in San Clemente. One of the prominent jocks there was Jed the Fish for his K-Rock days. And Calvary came in, and Chuck Smith bought it for cash. And that was a good move for them because it became a very good asset. I think he bought it for $3 million. At one time, it was worth maybe $50. Not that they're selling it. In fact, they purchased Radio Disney 1150, and I think now they're simulcasting. But I got there, and it's just another one of those things. Now I'm out of work, and I have 3 kids, one of them under 2. And I'm thinking, well, this is going to be interesting, and I call this a God thing. I got a call from a gentleman named Dave Spiker, one of my dear friends in radio, who, interestingly enough, he just called me up out of the blue one day while I got off my K-Big shift. He goes, you don't know me, I'm Dave Spiker. I said, no, Dave, I do know you, because when I was at KYMS, he was doing the spots for a local Christian bookstore called Joy Bells. And I thought, who's that guy? Well, what a great voice he's got. Well, that's Dave Spiker. And Dave said, I just thought we should have lunch and meet. I hear your show, and we have some things we could reminisce about. So I did, and when my contract was not picked up at the end of 96, he called me up and said, I've got some work for you. He and his partner started a little production company, so gave me a little work, and then further down the line, I got another call from him and said they're looking for an evening guy just to kind of handle the board op duties at K-Wave. And I said, well, I've got some time on my hand. So I went down there, and they said, well, we can't pay you very much. And I said, well, listen, every dollar is more than zero, right? So I took the job and was just doing the evenings there. You were handling the Calvary Chapel services and some other paid programming, and it was commercial, and it was a full Class B 50,000 watt FM at 107.9, the end of the dial, broadcasting from San Clemente Peak there. It's since been moved, but anyway, it was a nice signal as well, and I really enjoyed getting back into Christian radio. I was able to bring in some of my old colleagues from KYMS as we needed people, including, again, the aforementioned Chandler Haney and others. So we all took our turn at K-Wave, and the thing that was my great memory, I think, is that they asked me, how would you like to put your imprint, because I did become the program director there, on the station. And I said, well, we had a Saturday morning kids show, which was designed for preschool, maybe up through second or third grade. There were some characters that this fellow did. And I thought, well, I have a heart for, being the rocker that I was. I want to do something for the teens and the young adults. And there was a really good alternative Christian movement of the time in the late 90s, some really good bands, including DC Talk and others, Switchfoot and some other terrific bands out at the time. I'd like to do something with that. And they said, well, tell you what, put something together, some sort of demo, and pitch it to Chuck Smith. Now, Chuck Smith was famous for kind of opening up church services to hippies, barefoot hippies. Somehow, a conservative, originally Foursquare pastor was persuaded that you've got to be the pastor to surfers and hippies in the 70s, and so he was. And so I remembered that, and I put together a demo. I took out a portable recorder. I went to churches and talked to kids. I went to concerts and talked to artists. I asked them to talk up their songs that we would use to talk up various songs that we might play for the show. And we put this thing together. I like to think of it as K-Rock for Christians, but it was jockless, okay? My idea was to connect it all through production elements. So I went up there, and I got an audience with the Pope, right, with Chuck Smith. And I said, Chuck, Calvary Chapel is known for this, for working with young people, and this is my idea for a Saturday night show. We'll start with 2 hours, and this is what it'll be. And I played it to him, and he kind of thought about it. And he, his personal musical taste was pretty conservative. It was like Maranatha music. He didn't want to get too, but he liked this idea, and he said, okay. And what's more, I'll even introduce the show. And it was called Youth on Fire, and it was a labor of love. I probably spent more time working on that one show than I did on all the other shows that I needed to be sure were, coming in on time and that everything was where it was supposed to be, working with the jocks and all, of course, I like to do. But this show ran, and we got a lot of good response from it. And the neat thing was that a lot of the parents would listen with their teens and young adults, and it became kind of family listening, appointment listening on Saturday nights. So that's my greatest memory about working at K-Wave.
Wow. I think I recall that show. At the time, I think I was doing Christian Pirate Radio Saturday night on KKLA from, I think, 6 or 7 to midnight, depending on how many infomercials were sold, is when it would start. In fact, Dave Armstrong gave us the go-ahead with that, and then even late Friday, early Saturday for about, 8 months or so. But, it was fun to do stuff like that. And I don't know, it seems to me that right now in Christian music, there's just not that variety that there was back then. Back then, you were always looking forward to what's the next single that the record company is going to service us with. We were like waiting with bated breath. Oh my gosh, I can't wait for this. It was just like, you just had that on your calendar. Like, I gotta find out what the next song is. In fact, it was funny you mentioned K-Wave, because Ed Mackay was on the old K-Wave when it was with Jed the Fish. You told me you had a funny story about Ed that you want to share when he was with you at Quiz, correct?
Well, actually, we kind of crossed paths at Quiz, but we were part of this Orange County workshop, a voiceover workshop that, and then Ed and I we're both really interested in doing that as well as the on-air stuff. And as Ed told you, he was an audio engineer and did some TV audio and other such things, and news. I recall he got on KNX, right? News radio.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Was fit in perfectly, I think. But no, I mean, nothing specific. It's just we had a lot of fun in that voiceover workshop where, and if you should talk to him, one of the stories we remember is, and I think I don't know if it was Ed or someone else. They were in a supermarket and they heard this squeaky little voice, and the squeaky little voice belonged to a gal named Carla Cohen. And whether it was Ed or someone else, they said, that voice that you've got could be perfect for cartoons. And she goes, what voice? And he invited her to this voiceover workshop. So she came, and we're all there. And, we're trying to do character voices, right? We're trying to develop voices like she had to do, like cartoons, if we could get into it. Her idea of a character was to sound like a normal person. And so she got used to using her voice in such a way, she lowered it down, and she could sound normal. But her normal voice was like a Smurf. And people would say, that's a great character voice. No, that's my voice. And Ed would probably remember that.
How did she do as far as any progress in voiceover work? Is she working today in the film?
Yes, she did some work. She really did. And I don't know, where she is today, but I know she could do anything after she got done with our workshop. She could do normal. She could do her little squeaky voice. And last I had heard, she got an agent and was doing some work. So isn't that great? Someone picks you out from the supermarket checkout line and says, have you ever thought of doing this? And she actually said, okay. I hadn't thought about it, but I'll do it.
Hey, why not?
Workshop. Yeah.
Kind of reminds me of the song Incense and Peppermints, where the Strawberry Alarm Clock, nobody wanted to record it in the band. And so there was this guy that was in the recording session with them, just sitting there as a guest of one of the friends of the band. And they said, you sing the song. And that ended up being their biggest hit.
Yeah. Wow. That's serendipity, for sure. For sure. Anyway, that was like 1997 to 1999. I ended up, you referred to, the last 20 years or so of my career was spent as a producer for a company called Ambassador Advertising. It was started by a man named Al Sanders, who we lost a couple of years back, who had this idea that radio is the perfect medium for pastors that want to re-air their sermons, to have people listen, because as people were walking around the house, if they could listen to a Bible study or something, they'd be in great shape. They could do two things at once, multitask. Mm-hmm. So he prevailed upon Chuck Swindoll, who at the time was the pastor of the Fullerton EV Free Church, and he said, well, that's a great idea, Al, but I don't have any time to do this. And he goes, look, Chuck, all you got to do is you tape your sermons, right? Give them to us. We will cut them down. We will package them, and we'll communicate with the different Christian radio stations around, and even let people know that these are now available. So it was a marketing company as well as a production company. And that was the beginning of Ambassador. It was the late 50s, I think, mm-hmm. that he started it. And then eventually Focus on the Family came on the scene. And Jim Dobson had heard about Ambassador, said, what would it take to bring this vision to radio? So at that time they were in Pomona, and the owner's son-in-law, by the name of John Campbell, mm-hmm. went up there with Al, and they came up with a great formula. We don't have a lot of money, they said. Here's what we'll do. We'll do a barter relationship whereby these stations, you will have a few minutes to ask for a donation if you benefit from the program, and as the donations came in, you would give a percentage of that back to the station, so you didn't have to lay out a lot of cash up front. And that was a very successful formula and was really the beginning of what we think of as Christian radio, so that Salem and KKLA they will tell you, yes, we owe our being here really in large measure to Al Sanders. So I went to work there. I had several friends from the KYMS days that said that they were looking for another producer, and I was reluctant to leave K-Wave, but it was better money, and I'm glad I did it. It was an incredible opportunity. It was really the nexus of so much interesting programming. I ended up being the producer for Chuck Colson and Breakpoint, which was his radio ministry. He, of course, also had Prison Fellowship, which was his prison ministry. And the two are kind of interrelated. The idea of doing Breakpoint was if there was a Christian worldview program every day, it was 3.5 minutes long, a commentary that he himself would do, that you could begin to change the way people saw the world, from a biblical point of view. And so I spent many years working with him and his editor, and it was just one of the great experiences of my life. We lost Chuck several years back, and then it was a combination of John Stonestreet and Eric Metaxas that followed him, and I got to work with them, and that was one of my major clients. And that was a day-to-day. It brought me back to my days in the KPFK newsroom where there was a story that broke, and Chuck would call, and he was in Naples, Florida. We recorded him through ISDN, the Integrated Services Digital Network, which was a high-quality phone line type thing at the time. And he would say, never mind what's on tomorrow. We got to get this on. And, it's 4 o'clock, and I record him. Get me in front of a microphone. And you'd cut it up, and you'd put it back on. And because Ambassador developed satellite delivery of these programs, you could simply substitute it at a moment's notice. And I love the immediacy of okay, if you're not live on the air, at least, you're with the news cycle. That's great.
Well, I remember Al Sanders usually said, from Washington, D.C., here's Chuck Colson with Breakpoint.
Yep.
And I remember him as the original announcer on Insight for a Living. Yep. And I missed having him on there. He was replaced by Dave Spiker. Now Bill Meyer is actually the announcer for Insight for a Living. And that theme song is like catchy. It plays through your head all day. Jim Gravinelli actually used to have morning funnies on KKLA, and there'd be funny lines from pastors. And one time, Chuck Swindoll was reciting the lyrics to Yakety Yak by the Coasters, and so Jim mixed the instrumental parts of Yakety Yak, and Chuck's reciting it. Now, one I wanted to do, but I knew I could not do it just because it would be too controversial, but Chuck said it anyway. He's like, I look to the lyrics of Bob Dylan's Rainy Day Women 12 and 35. I think about Christian and the martyrs. They'll stone you when you're trying to make a stand. Though I would not be so all alone, everybody must get stoned. That's terrific. And I wish I could have, put that cool organ, guitar, psychedelic sound underneath that and had that for the morning funnies, but there'd probably be a lot of complaints because people wouldn't have gotten the context of it.
Probably. Chuck Swindoll, such a great speaker, right? I mean, he was like the archetype of what you think of as a radio pastor. What's interesting is Chuck was a very shy man, a very reserved man, and in person. Same thing with really Chuck Smith and also Greg Laurie. Very quiet men. You wouldn't think they could stand up in front of thousands of people and do what they do, but they did.
Well, it's funny.
They're actually better amongst crowds, throngs of thousands than one-to-one.
Well, it's funny. A lot of clergy are like that. A lot of clergymen are like that, which is kind of weird to think about. Johnny Carson was even a very shy person. Like,
absolutely,
there would be
he was famous for that.
Hollywood gatherings, and he'd be kind of like sitting there by himself, or maybe he'd just be talking with somebody else who was a guest, who was somebody that was not known but happened to be at the party. That's why he oftentimes had people on who were not known but had some interesting hobby or some sort of interesting collection to share with Johnny, because he felt normal, comfortable around the normal Joe Blows instead of the big, superstars.
Yeah. It's interesting, those kind of dichotomies between the public person and the private person.
We're in conversation with Bill Wright, longtime Southern California radio personality as well as audio production director. And next time he shares more stories about Richard Simmons and wraps up our interview with his best advice to those who want to get into showbiz.